Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I'm recording these Thursday afternoon because I might have another thing scheduled for tomorrow, so I didn't want to end up like last week and posting them late Friday night or anything like that. So if I happen to miss any of your questions, please just repost them in this week's Q&As, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Sorry if I missed anybody's, but let's jump in and see what we got. First up is a question from Alan Bingham. Alan actually sent it over messages, but it was a very cool question, so I wanted to talk about it here. But I also wanted to use this to remind everybody that absolutely any question at all that you have, feel free to post wherever it is that you support. At the moment, it's Patreon, Floatplane, and Direct on YouTube. And then just ask your question in the latest Q&A post. That way it's really easy for me to determine what I'm supposed to answer on camera, what's just a message or anything like that. But anyway, Alan got a Sony KV36H S510. So it's essentially an HD CRT. And it's one of those that processes 240p as 480i, so I'm assuming it's one of the ones with the processing boards in it that's pretty much the same as a flat panel that might scale everything to 1080i. So it's an interesting TV, and it certainly has its uses, and Alan definitely wants to hang on to it, so there's a few questions. Number one, do I think the RetroTink products would work well on something like that? Yes, because what you could do is line double 240p to 480p and then add scan lines, just like I showed in that classic consoles on VGA monitors video. And by doing that, you would be able to get an image that's a little dim. You would have to turn up the brightness on the TV, but it would really resemble the look of true 240p, and the RetroTink doesn't add any lag. So while light gun games wouldn't work, and I don't think 3D games would work, everything else should work fine, and with no lag added to whatever the TV already has. Check out that video, Classic Consoles on VGA Monitors, for more info on that. As well as other choices of a scaler if you, for whatever reason, wouldn't want to use a RetroTink. Next, do I have a recommendation for how to go from the RetroTink to that TV? Well, that specific TV has a DVI input, which should be DVI-D, which means that any basic HDMI to DVI converter or adapter should work fine. I linked to those in the Amazon store that's linked in all of these videos. I use a couple of different brands that have worked really well for me, but for whatever reason, if that DVI input doesn't work, because the RetroTink's already doing the scaling, you can get away with getting any cheap HDMI to component video converter. Also, I have those linked in the Amazon store. They're like $20, and they only just convert digital to analog, so no lag is added. The quality is usually decent enough. Also, since there's a mixture of systems that they plan on running through the RetroTink, and they don't plan to buy two of them, would I say the Pro is a better choice overall for them than the multi-format. Even though it doesn't have 480p pass-through, I could always set my Wii to 480i and let the RetroTink Pro double it to 480p. So two answers to that. First, yes, I agree that the Pro would be the right one for this because you're concentrating, it says later on in your question, you're concentrating on 2D content. So definitely the Pro would be better. But also, since you're running it through a G-Comp switch, you could have one of those outputs go to your RetroTink and the other one of those outputs going directly into the component video inputs of the TV. So anything that's a game that either is 240p that needs line doubling, or any kind of thing that you would want to deinterlace, which I'm not sure you would want to do that on this TV, but you would run that through the RetroTink and then just go direct into the back of the TV for Wii, original Xbox, PlayStation 2, and pretty much anything else, maybe GameCube if you get the component cables for it. So that would definitely be the way to approach that. Now, once again, this is going to be a board that's probably similar to those flat panel TVs of that era, so it might add lag, but that brings me to your next question. Will I experience less, more, or similar lag by sending the RetroTink through the DVI port than going into the component ports? No idea. You're going to definitely have to test that for yourself. You could pick up a Time Sleuth. You could try to look for other people that have that same model TV and a Time Sleuth. But that should be as easy as just getting an HDMI to DVI cable and then that same HDMI to component video converter I just talked about. And you should be able to input lag all of those ports and see for yourself. There's been some model HD CRTs that have been proven with the time sleuth to not change the resolution and not add any lag, and others do. I think it's like 2 frames of lag. So about what you'd see on your average flat panel, although your average lag on a flat panel has been consistently going down over the past few years. Moving along, do I personally believe that those type of CRTs have a legitimate place in a gaming setup? Absolutely. So it's a bit of a niche use, but if I had the space for it, I would find one of those exact TVs that you have or ones that are very similar to it. And that would be the ultimate monitor for a PlayStation 2, because most of the titles are 480i, and rather than deinterlace them, scaling them to 1080i is a really cool look, and you don't get that same weird flicker interlaced look. But also, depending on the TV and depending on its features, hooking up consoles like the Xbox and Wii to it might also be an amazing experience. And of course, TV and movies. The best way to watch some of those 480i TV shows in many cases is just a nice CRT. So that scaled to 1080i, assuming it's one of those models, would be a great use. Now, I don't think they're great for 240p stuff for all the reasons I just said, but your solution of using a RetroTink should be totally fine. Anything over 480p, just my opinion, but anything over 480p, I think usually looks more at home on a flat panel. But there's always some exceptions. But even for movies, for me personally, whenever I want to watch a movie on a CRT, it's to either have something that's interlaced, run natively, or something with a lot of film grain that I want to have more of an original feel to it. I usually use 480i or 480p, not 720p or 480i in that scenario. But that's just preference. You could absolutely love the way it looks in 720p if your monitor is compatible. And lastly is the question of some of these HD CRTs are not entirely analog, some are digital. That's just what I talked about some of the boards inside of them are the same video processors that were in the 1080i flat panels of the time. So, this is... it was kind of a lengthy question that Alan had, but I think this kind of tied together all of my thoughts on these HD CRTs. So I really wanted to talk about it here in the Q&As because hopefully it would kind of steer people in the right direction. And if you're in the New York area and have one of these that you're looking to get rid of, I'll totally take one just because I really need one for testing and just for fun. Next up, Marco Vizzini says they're wanting to play their PSP Go in full screen on a CRT. Will GBS control and downscaling or pass-through mode also give options to stretch the image? That's an excellent question. I'm not really sure. That's something you'd want to test yourself. I don't have time today to set it up and test. Otherwise, I would, because I'm very curious about that as well. But if anybody in the comments might know the answer to that, that would be really cool. Even just post on YouTube so everybody could see. Excellent question. I'm sorry I don't have the answer to that one. Paulo Posadi had a bit of a longer question, so I'm just going to skip to the answer. Basically, Paulo is looking to take old computers like the Commodore 64, X68K, and a bunch of others, and connect them to a flat panel. Now, they have a small 22-inch 16:9 LED TV that has a whole bunch of different inputs, but they're skeptical about the screen geometry, shape, and 240p scaling and processing. So the question is, do you stick with a 16:9 screen and hope that you can get the aspect ratio right? Do you purchase a proper 4x3-inch LCD monitor? Do you try to deal with a 1280x1024 5:4 aspect ratio monitor? Or do you try to get a CRT, even though it's a pain to service and takes up a lot of space? So the answer is both very easy and very complicated, in that if you want to guarantee that the aspect ratio is always correct, find yourself any CRT whatsoever that could handle those inputs, or a version that you could convert them to, and be done with it. So whether that's a cheap VGA monitor or just a consumer grade TV with maybe an S-video input, and then you convert any of the RGB to S-video, and then you never have to worry about aspect ratio again. It's going to be the same overscanned, probably improper aspect ratio, probably geometry weird, but it's exactly what you would have expected. And whatever's off about it, in my opinion at least, adds the charm to it. So that's kind of what makes it feel original. And it also, when you get these older computers and older consoles that are so perfect on flat screens, it's still a great solution, but it doesn't feel quite the same. So I know they take up a lot of space, and you said you don't have a lot of room for it, but consider like a 13-inch or something. It's something that's very light and cheap, and that you might be able to use that. But assuming for a moment that you just don't want to deal with CRTs at all, I would try to find a 4x3 LCD, and especially one that has H&V controls in it. You should be able to kind of find one of them in decent shape, or there might still be new ones out there. You might have to buy a panel and wire up your own with like a VGA to LVDS connector or something like that. But I think no matter what flat panel you're using, you're going to want to make sure that it's scaled properly. So depending on which computer you're using, I don't know the compatibility of all of those, but maybe a RetroTink product just to simply line double them and get them in a generic 4x3 aspect ratio, maybe the open source scan converter, or maybe even that Retro Scaler A1, which I talked about in the VGA or classic consoles on VGA monitors video. As long as something is scaled properly, you should have the correct aspect ratio, and it should look very good, regardless if it's a 4x3 or a 16:9 screen. So that's kind of the easy and short answer to that is, if you really want something that looks exactly like the original, you're going to have to find a CRT. But heck, even this thing you already have might be doing a good enough job, and you might not gain that much of a bump from going to any of these other processors. But I would kind of look into it and see how important each of those factors are to you and make your decision based on that. Super Cowabunga said they enjoyed the video on the RGB driver versus LCD driver for the Sega Nomad, and they're wondering which LCD I had installed into the Nomad at the time of the review. Many are reporting the newer IPS LCD to yield a clearer image. I'm guessing at the time of the video it wasn't supported yet, which is why the RetroRGB page only links to the TFT LCD. Yes, that's exactly why. At the time that kit was released, I was only able to get that one LCD panel with it. And to be honest, I wasn't really thrilled about either of those. The original LCD driver was great and super sharp, but you had that weird shimmering on horizontal movement that kind of drove me nuts. I blame Mark from My Life in Gaming for constantly, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And also on the RGB driver, while there was no shimmering, it was a really soft image. It was disappointingly soft, to be honest with you. Now, you're saying, you're asking if I've seen the IPS version in person. No, I wish I had. If I do, I'll probably, at the very least, take a cell phone picture and post my thoughts on social media or something. But I do want to check it out. And I heard that not only was the IPS screen a little better, but they had upgraded the RGB driver itself with newer software, so it's a little sharper. So I haven't seen one, but I'll definitely follow up at some point with that. You also said, why would the IPS be slightly cheaper than the TFT? Just quantity. If those IPS screens are made for different purposes, but some big company is buying them 100,000 at a time, and the TFT screens are really being manufactured for a company that's buying 10,000 at a time, it's going to be a giant price difference. You said you ordered the LCD without knowing about the newer IPS, but would try to take some nice comparison shots if you ever get it, because it's on the way. All right. So, yeah, I know. I mean, you're pretty much in the same spot that I'm in. If you try the new one, see if it makes a difference. And also, you might want to look into, is there a new firmware for the RGB driver? Is it something you could flash yourself? I don't think so, but it's something to work on. And also, you wanted to share for anyone outside of Japan looking to get one. They had an excellent experience using Zen Marketplace as a middleman to get the RGB driver in the States. I chose DHL and had it within 8 days. Thank you for the tip. I'm super, super lucky that I have friends out in Japan that don't hate me when I bother the heck out of them to get me stuff like this. But that's a really great choice for anybody that was looking to buy one. And I'd like to follow up on that at some point, because it's so close to being perfect. And I love the Nomad. So I'd love to have a good solution for that. Ziggs has power-related questions this week. First, do I have any recommendation for power strips or best practices? They currently have a monster power conditioner with all the main equipment and a few consoles going into a 15-plug strip with little room for expansion. I like having everything plugged in, and I'm just looking for ideas to tidy up. I would do exactly that. anytime you go and have an AC power strip like that, as long as you're only powering on one or two things at the same time, it's essentially the same as just having two consoles plugged in. Yeah, there's a little bit of vampire power, but just in the context of safety and all that stuff, and in performance, it's pretty much the same as going into a wall. You want to make sure that your monster power conditioner is the right kind for something like this. There's a bunch of different kinds and a bunch of different things that you might want to use. That's probably a whole other issue. But either way, if you're having any problems, just unplug the power conditioner. Try that and see if that fixes it. If not, plug it directly in the wall, see if that fixes it, and just do like your typical nerd, remove one thing at a time and to troubleshoot. I just would not go direct DC to all the different consoles. You could do it, but it would cost more, and it's just opening yourself up for so much interference and trouble. Any live musicians know exactly what I mean by that. So I think what you're doing is fine. However, it seems that you are having a power issue. When you're using wireless controllers, you're able to get 30 seconds of gameplay, and then your screen just locks. The image will not change. However, the game is still playing in the background. Okay, so that's weird. That could be console related. I don't think, if you're only having a problem with that one console, I wouldn't think it's related to your power strip setup. I mean, the first thing I would always check if the sound keeps playing and the video doesn't is, what's your scaler like? Are you going directly into a CRT? Does it work when directly plugged into something, so you remove it from your full switch setup? And then, of course, look inside of it. Is the RGB mod well done? Are there any loose wires? Things can get jostled in shipping, so you could have had a perfectly flawlessly modded one that, just ended up getting bounced down a flight of stairs because UPS dropped it or something. And then, of course, I would always check the power supply for the N64 and then anything else on the inside. I haven't really seen those require cap replacements that often. I actually don't think I've personally seen one that required one. I've heard of people that did it just for preservation reasons. And it makes sense, but yeah, that's kind of a weird one. So I really wouldn't know what direction to point you in until you started troubleshooting piece by piece. So first, take the N64 out of your main setup and plug it directly into something and go from there. And if it still does it, plug it into something else. So if you have a retro tank, can you also just plug it into a flat panel TV, even though, it's going to be laggy and not work right, or probably not work right, but still, it's a troubleshooting step. And to be honest, as much as I hate to admit it, if you don't have any other secondary way of playing it, this is probably a good time for one of those cheap cables just to use as a test device. Never to play on, though, but anything else would be just as good. A composite jack in the back of a flat panel, anything. So I guess I would just go through and start checking piece by piece until you could determine what the actual problem, either internally or externally, would be. Tyrant Rex wants to know what methods there are for capturing DS or 3DS games. They're aware of a couple of homebrew methods that work on new 3DS models that could capture video over Wi-Fi, but those can't capture DS games. So emulation is definitely the easiest way for both of those, but if you want to use original consoles, there used to be USB-based mods that you could install into those that would go directly into a PC, and you'd have to play through your PC, which I guess is a bit laggy. I guess you could play on the handheld and use that PC connection to capture. I'm not sure how comfortable that would be with a bunch of wires hooked up, but it should be decent enough. But I don't know if those are still being made. You could find the Nitro DS kits, and I believe there's some for 3DS as well, that are dev kits that essentially have something like that already built in, and they output composite or S-video. So you could take your DS, I have one of these, I think it's stuffed in storage somewhere, but you take your DS, you plug your either Game Boy Advance or NDS cartridge into it, and it has two Nintendo multi-outs. So you would, if you wanted both screens, you would have to use like two RetroTink minis or something like that, and you'd be able to capture those right onto your PC and be able to have both screens coming through it. Those, they're expensive, but you could still find those. I don't know about the 3DS versions. I've never seen them. I've never personally seen them, and I've never stumbled across one on eBay, but those would be the easiest ways at the moment. So I could be out of the loop. There could be other things out there that I just haven't seen yet. So please, if I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments. But if you're just looking to do some capture, I would start with emulation just because it's infinitely easier. And if not, then just step to maybe looking into the Nitro DS stuff. Goodknight says, looking to get a new CRT that will support the OSSC's 480p Line 2X mode, as their current one only goes up to 720p. I think you reversed those. I think you meant you're looking to get a new CRT that can do 720p because your current only does 480p. Should I bend and get one of those gaming LCDs that has a low response time? I'm really fond of my little CRT monitor and it's low lag, but a higher resolution would be nice for my video recording. Assuming that I'm interpreting your question correctly, it is my personal opinion that if you're going to be doing 720p and up, just using a flat panel is probably a great way to go about it. And 480p is great for line doubling 240p on a VGA monitor, which coincidentally I've talked about twice already in this Q&A, or for just any kind of direct 480p, Dreamcast, GameCube, Wii, original Xbox, stuff like that. So I would really just kind of decide what's the most content you're going to be using. Is it mostly retro stuff? Then 480p is probably going to be great. If you're going to be doing mostly HD stuff with also your OSSE connected, a low lag gaming monitor would be a really good choice. That's easier to mess with, easier to find. And just remember, the lag should be low enough that you shouldn't notice it. However, you're going to have things like motion blur and not true blacks and stuff like that unless you drop quite a bit of money on it. So just something to take into consideration, but I would kind of make your decision based on those. Jason Guffey had a couple of questions about audio. I started to read through and I think I understand the question. So I'm going to try my best to just answer it, and please let me know if I got it wrong. The first question is there any difference between digital audio over HDMI and the audio that you would get with an optical audio connection? Toastlink, SPDIF, whatever you want to call it, but the optical one with a beam of light, not the one that uses the RCA cable. And as far as I know, there is absolutely zero difference between them. It's fully digital on both sides. It could handle up to 5.1, 7.1 the same. And if there is any difference, once again, as far as I know, it might only be component related. So, all devices, it's exactly the same, but this one model receiver had a problem with optical or something. I'm making that last part up. That's just my guess, that if you've heard anything like that. I learn something every week when I do these Q&As, and then I get people's feedback. I could be wrong, but I've never seen anything in my testing to suggest that they were different. But I wouldn't consider myself a super expert in that or anything. The next question is, in order to use a stereo receiver that they just got with no digital inputs at all, they were planning on getting an HDMI breakout that it's kind of a pass-through and a breakout device that also gets optical audio out of it and even RCA audio. It's actually what I use for my data path vision, because that I sometimes have issues with HDMI signals. So I'm able to put my HDMI in. I use a basic HDMI to DVI cable out, and that also breaks out the audio to optical over RCA, optical over digital, and also just standard left and right audio. And that seems to work great. Once you get to that point, though, once you're now transferring it to analog audio, I wouldn't worry too much about anything else. Read some basic Amazon reviews, get a cheap one, and kind of go from there. I don't imagine there being a giant difference between all of the same reasonably priced ones. I'm 100% positive that if it's got the word audio in it, there's somebody out there that makes a $10,000 converter that they claim will be the greatest thing you've ever heard, and a massive difference between that and another one. But I mean, that's everything with the word audiophile in it. So my suggestion to you in that specific scenario would be to get a very cheap HDMI pass-through. Make sure it supports whatever signals that you're using. So you said PS4, so if it's the latest model PS4, I would get one that supports 4K 60 pass-through, and then just break out the audio that way, and you should have a total solution for like $35. I think I list the one that I use in my Amazon page, but I don't go above 1080p for this setup, so I don't know. You might need a better one or a higher spec one than this, but I think I got your questions right. Please let me know if I don't. Focus just installed a virtual tap into their Virtual Boy and are using a Super Nintendo style multi-out in order to get the video output from that. And the question is, at the moment, they're using a pass-through cable, which will work completely fine, except if you then try to use that cable into a Super Nintendo. So the question then would be, what do you have to do on the virtual tap side to modify it so that you could use just a standard Super Nintendo cable? And unfortunately, I'm out of the loop on this one. I remember when it first came out. I remember asking the questions. I remember talking to Furtech, and I don't remember what we decided. You might want to reach out to Ben from iFix Retro. I believe he's done a bunch of these with the SNES multi-out, and they seem to be working fine. So I guess I would check with Ben and see. But yeah, that's an interesting one, because do you go through the trouble to change your already perfectly working setup just to prevent somebody from accidentally using the wrong cable? Wouldn't it be fine if you just wrote with like that silver magic marker on all writable parts of the cable for Virtual Boy only? It's really up to you. I would make sure that it matches the cable, but I'm also having equipment go in and out of my house and apartment all the time. Stuff gets in storage, stuff goes to friends, stuff gets lent to other people just for testing. And so for me personally, it would be super easy to mix up a cable, send the wrong cable to the wrong person or whatever else. So I would never want to have that set up. But if you have your own personal collection and you're not bringing these around places, it might not be worth it. But I would get one of those silver Sharpies and mark up everything as best you can just to be safe. Adam Ant wants to know what the holdup is for the N64 Ultra HDMIs. So I think the problem is a fewfold. I think first, Marshall has always had a problem manufacturing these. I don't know why. I don't understand it, but every revision has required some kind of manual fix from him as soon as he gets them from the factory, as far as I remember, at least. So there's always been a manufacturing problem with these. And on top of that, Marshall's looking to implement a new revision with some new features. And I think that's probably a holdup as well. It's incredibly frustrating because you can't get a hold of Marshall at all. And this problem has been going on for years. So it's very easy for anybody, including me, to sit here and point fingers and say it's this person's fault and that's why. And the reality is it might not be anybody's fault at all. Marshall's one developer trying to do this all by himself. It could very well be that everything's been perfect, but all the problems that have happened are out of his control. I don't know the real answer to that, but the problem, to be blunt, is Marshall one way or the other. Whether it's his fault or not, he's the one in charge of the project. He's not talking to anybody. Really, there's no post publicly. There's no social media accounts to follow. He talks to like 3 people on a forum, and that's pretty much it. So that's the unfortunate answer. And it sucks because people have been wanting these for years. The prices are super jacked up on eBay for them. It just doesn't make any sense. It's obviously a product people want. So if I were anybody in this situation, I would drop everything I'm doing to get these out to make some money. But, once again, I'm just speculating. So I don't mean to throw shade. It is what it is. And also, thank you very much for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Photosfen has kind of an interesting problem, and I don't know if there's one solid good answer for it, but I'm going to try my best and hopefully we'll figure this out. So the issue is a friend of theirs has a bunch of consoles that all have SCART cables, but some are RGB SCART and some are composite video over SCART. And at the moment, there is no retro gaming scaler that can handle both through the SCART port. There might be in the future, but it's obviously a solution that you want to solve now. So you could do 2 things. You could get either an OSSC or a RetroTink 2X SCART for the RGB consoles. And then for the composite video consoles, you can get something like this. You might also have to get a plug to receptacle adapter or something like that. But essentially, it just breaks out composite video and audio from a SCART cable. So this would solve the problem there, but then you would also have to figure out how to get those consoles into something. So do you get a Core U into an OSSC? Do you get 2 different RetroTink products? And that's unfortunately something that you're going to have to decide based on your setup. Depending on what consoles you have and what else you're looking to do, picking up a RetroTink 2X Mini, an open source scan converter, and in one of these cheap converters that just converts the pins, that might be a great solution. Using the Core U might be a great solution. It really totally depends on your full setup and how many consoles and which consoles. So hopefully I could at least point you in the right direction. And if you want me to elaborate anymore, just let me know, and I'll try to get into more detail next week. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks so much to everybody who supports in absolutely any way. It's absolutely awesome that you do so, and I really appreciate it. You're keeping all of these videos and all of the crazy behind-the-scenes stuff going. And of course, thanks to everybody that participates in these, because I really enjoy doing them. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week.